Alien girl begged for leftovers. Then the human whispered, "You deserve more." Cold wind blew through the narrow streets of the alien market. Colorful lights flickered, and strong smells floated in the air: roasted meat, sour drinks, and sweet powders. Traders shouted in many languages, calling buyers to their stalls. But no one looked at the small creature hiding behind a trash bin. She was thin, with fur matted by dirt, wearing rags too big for her small alien body. Her long ears twitched at every loud sound, and her tail curled tightly around her legs. People passed by without seeing her, or maybe they saw her and just didn't care. Her stomach growled again, louder this time, making her wince in pain. She peeked out and saw a large bowl of soup placed on a stall table. A rich alien customer slurped from it, and then threw the half-empty bowl aside like it was nothing. The dirty bowl rolled toward the bin, stopping just a few steps from her. The girl crawled forward on hands and knees, too weak to walk upright. She reached out carefully and pulled the bowl close. With shaking fingers, she scraped what little food remained from the sides. The soup was cold now, sticky and dry, but to her, it was heaven. She licked her fingers and held the bowl like it was treasure. Suddenly, a boot stomped down right next to her hand. She froze, eyes wide, expecting to be hit or kicked. A deep alien voice growled, "Street rat, go die somewhere else." The trader kicked the bowl out of her hands, sending it flying into the trash. The girl curled up in fear, trying not to cry. She had learned that crying only made them angrier. People laughed and walked past. Uncaring, she stayed there, small and silent, hoping to disappear. But then, footsteps, slow and steady, not loud like boots, but soft, calm, different. She smelled something new: metal, oil, and something warm. She opened one eye and saw black boots, cleaner than any she had seen before. A tall figure stood in front of her, not moving, not speaking. She looked up slowly, afraid, and saw a human. He wasn't like the others. He had brown skin, short dark hair, and strange eyes that were not angry or cruel. He didn't have weapons or guards, just a small bag slung over his shoulder. He crouched down in front of her, looking straight into her eyes. She froze again, ready to run, but his voice stopped her. Soft, steady, calm, he said, "You deserve more." She blinked, not sure she had heard him right. She had never heard those words before. She didn't even know what they really meant. Was he joking? Was it a trap? He reached into his bag and took out a fresh food packet. He placed it on the ground in front of her, not too close to scare her. And then he stood up, turned around, and began to walk away. She stared at the packet, unsure. Was it real? Was it poisoned? But the smell was too much, too strong, too good. Her hands grabbed it before her brain could decide. She tore it open and stuffed the food in her mouth. Hot tears rolled down her face, not from pain, but from taste. Warm, soft bread, real meat, sweet sauce. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten real food. She looked up again, searching for the human. He was already far down the street, walking slowly through the crowd. But something inside her changed, for the first time. She wanted to move, not to survive but to follow. She got up on shaky legs, clutching the empty packet in her hand. People stared as she limped after him. She didn't care. She just didn't want the feeling to end. The human turned a corner and vanished. She ran as fast as she could, stumbling, falling, getting up again. And then, she saw him again. He was standing still, waiting. He had known she would follow. She stopped a few steps away from him, breathing hard. He looked at her and smiled a little, not a full smile but enough. He pointed to a small repair shop nearby and said, "If you're coming, then come in." She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward him, not on all fours this time, but upright, slowly. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But something had started that night, something big, and all it took was one whisper. "You deserve more." The night air was cold, but the little alien girl didn't feel it anymore. Her hands were still clutching the food packet, Though it was long empty, she followed the human into the small shop. Unsure of what she was doing, everything inside looked strange, full of machines, wires, glowing parts, and sharp tools. She stood near the doorway, afraid to enter fully. The human didn't rush her. He simply walked over to a low table and set down his bag. Then he started making something, without saying a word. The warm smell filled the air. This time not from the market, but from a small cooking device inside the shop. Her nose twitched. Her stomach growled again, but she stayed where she was. She had never been allowed inside anywhere before. Shops, homes, even shelters, they all closed their doors to her kind. The human poured something into a small metal bowl. Steam rising gently from it. He placed the bowl on the floor and backed away. He didn't offer it to her directly, maybe because he knew she was still afraid. But she understood his message. She walked slowly forward, crawling again, but not from weakness this time, from habit. She picked up the bowl and took a sip. The heat shocked her tongue at first, but she didn't stop. The taste was soft and salty, something simple, but filling. She finished the soup in silence, feeling warmth spread through her chest. The human walked to a nearby bench and sat down, wiping his hands on a cloth. He didn't look at her like she was strange or dirty. He looked at her like she was just ... someone. She looked around the shop, unsure of what everything was. There were broken machines, floating pads, boxes filled with glowing screws. It didn't look like a home, but to her, it felt safer than anywhere she had ever been. The human finally spoke again, his voice low and even. "You can stay the night, if you want," he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't run either. He stood, went into another room, and returned with a blanket. He placed it near the corner of the shop, on a soft old mat. Then he turned off a few lights, left one glowing dim, and lay down on his own bench. She walked to the mat slowly, clutching the blanket. It smelled like oil and metal, but it was warm. She wrapped herself tightly and curled up. Her body shook not from the cold, but from something else. She wasn't used to kindness. It made her heart beat in strange ways. And for the first time in years, she closed her eyes without fear. In the middle of the night, she woke up to a strange sound, a soft whimper, almost like crying. She sat up quietly and saw the human, sitting at a desk, holding a small photo in his hands. There were no tears, but his face looked broken, tired. She watched him silently, not moving. Then she lay back down, eyes wide open, wondering, why would someone like him be sad? He had food, a home, tools, warm, everything she didn't. But maybe he had lost something too. She turned over and pulled the blanket tighter, not knowing that she had just taken the first step into a life she never thought she'd have. And the human, though silent, had already made his choice. He wasn't going to let this one slip away, not again. When the sun rose, the shop was quiet. The girl opened her eyes slowly, confused by how soft everything felt. No shouting, no kicking, no cold ground. Just the quiet hum of machines and the smell of metal and cooked food. She sat up and looked around. The human was not on the bench anymore. She stood slowly, wrapping the blanket around herself. Every muscle in her body felt sore, but not in the same way as the street pain. This was the soreness of rest, of being alive. She walked softly into the next room, following the sound of soft clinks and whirs. There he was, sitting at a table, fixing a small floating device with steady hands. The air was warm from a heater on the wall. He looked up and gave her a nod. Not a smile, but something close. She nodded back, unsure what to say or do. No one had ever asked her name, and she had never needed one. She was just it. Thing, trash, or beast, depending on who was shouting. The human pointed to a small seat beside the work table and said, "If you want to sit, that's okay." She hesitated, then climbed up on it carefully. It wobbled slightly under her light weight, but held firm. He handed her a small cloth and said, "Wipe these." Slowly, one by one, she looked at the greasy machine parts in the box, then at him. Was this a test? Was this the moment he'd throw her out, if she failed? But he just went back to his tools, trusting her without pressure. So she picked up one screw and wiped it gently, then another, and another. Her fingers moved slowly but surely. Time passed, like that, quietly, gently. A rhythm began to form. Between them, work, rest, a shared meal, silence. It wasn't friendship yet, but it wasn't fear either. Later that day, while he was out gathering parts, she wandered through the shop and found a dusty shelf. There were broken photos, human faces, smiling, dirty from age. She wiped one with her sleeve and looked closer. A human girl stood beside the man, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had big eyes, a crooked smile, and she was holding a tiny toolbox. On the back of the photo, someone had written in faded ink, "Lena, my best engineer." The girl stared at the name, her heart thudding slowly. She placed the photo back and sat down. For the first time, she began to wonder what her life could be. Not just hiding, not just begging, but something more, something human. That night, when the human returned, he saw her looking at the toolbox on the table. He placed down a small package beside her and said nothing. She opened it and found a tiny jumpsuit, patched but clean, in her size. She looked at him, eyes wide, unsure how to accept a gift so big. He simply said, "If you're going to work here, you'll need something to wear." She took the jumpsuit, stood up, and bowed low, not from fear, but from respect. And then, for the first time, she spoke softly. "I don't have a name," she said. The human looked at her, thoughtful. "Then let's change that," he said. "Do you want one?" She nodded. "Just once." He thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Hope," he said, "because that's what you remind me of." Her lips trembled, not knowing how to respond. But the name echoed in her heart, like a bell. Hope. That night, she wrote it on a piece of scrap metal using a dull tool. She hung it above her sleeping mat. Her name, her place. She didn't understand everything yet, but something was growing inside her courage. And beside her, the human looked at the old photo of his daughter. He whispered to himself, "Lena, I hope you'd be proud." In the dark, two broken souls had begun to repair each other, not through big promises, but through small acts of care and hope. The girl with no past had just taken her first real step toward a future. Hope stood in front of the mirror, frozen. She blinked once, then leaned closer, confused by the reflection staring back. Her fur was no longer tangled and black with grime. Her face, though still thin, was cleaner, her eyes brighter. She touched the side of her cheek slowly, as if asking, "Is this really me?" Behind her, the repair shop buzzed with life. A delivery drone flew in through the window and dropped a fresh box of parts. The human, who everyone now called Doc, didn't look up. He was busy fixing the arm of a medical bot. Hope had been there for 10 days now. She wore a proper jumpsuit, her name stitched on the chest with shaky letters. She helped around the shop, carrying light parts, sorting wires, and handing tools without being asked. She never begged anymore, never crawled anymore. She stood, walked, spoke, and listened. Other aliens had started noticing her. Some stared, others whispered, a few laughed cruelly. "Look at that street rat pretending to be someone." They'd sneer, but she didn't flinch anymore. Doc had told her once, "You're not what they say you're, what you choose to become." Hope didn't fully understand the words, but they gave her strength, and she repeated them in her head whenever her tail shook. One afternoon, a tall lizard-like alien entered the shop. He looked around with sharp eyes and walked over to Doc. "I heard you're hiring animals now," he said, his voice full of poison. Hope stiffened, her hands curling into fists. Doc didn't blink, didn't look up. "She's not an animal," he said calmly. "She's my assistant." The lizard chuckled, tossed a broken scanner onto the table, and said, "Fix this, human, and keep your pet quiet." Doc didn't argue, but his hands worked faster than usual. Hope stood near the shelves, staring at the lizard's shadow stretching across the floor. She wanted to speak, to shout, but Doc's voice echoed in her head. "You're what you choose to become." When the lizard left, Hope exhaled slowly. Doc finally looked at her. "Words only hurt when we believe them," he said. She nodded slowly, even though her hands were still shaking. Later that night, she stayed up in the back room, working with old wires. She wanted to build something a small light, maybe a tool, anything. She didn't know how to design things yet, but she had seen Doc fix hundreds of items. She copied his movements, his calm focus. The tool she built didn't work right, but it lit up for 2 seconds, and that was enough. Hope rushed to show Doc the next morning. He looked at the tiny blinking light in her hands and said nothing at first. Then, without smiling, he whispered, "You're learning fast." That one sentence felt like sunlight. That same day, a customer came in with a broken drone. Doc was busy with something important, so he looked at Hope. "Can you handle it?" he asked. She nodded nervously, and he let her try. Her hands trembled at first, but she remembered every step: how to open the panel, where to clean the dust, how to reset the circuit. The customer watched silently, arms crossed, ready to laugh at her. But then the drone lifted off the table and hovered steadily. Hope stepped back, oil on her cheek, breathing fast. The customer stared, then grunted. Didn't expect that. He tossed a few coins on the table and left. Hope turned to Doc, her heart pounding. He gave a small nod and said, "You fixed it." Hope couldn't speak, her throat tight with emotion. She had never done something right in front of others before. That night, she sat by her sleeping mat, staring at the small metal scrap with her name carved on it. "Hope," she whispered it out loud, letting the word dance off her tongue. She still remembered the trash, the kicks, the cold, but now she also had something else: purpose, not just survival, but meaning, and somewhere deep inside. She knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The sound of pounding fists echoed through the shop walls. Hope dropped the tool she was holding, and her ears twitched from the sudden noise. Doc looked up from his workbench, frowning slightly but not surprised. The pounding came again, harder this time, followed by a voice, sharp and official. "Open up. By Order 17 of the Sector Safety Code." Hope's tail curled around her leg as fear returned like a forgotten shadow. She had heard that kind of voice before, the one that dragged children from alleys and made them vanish. Doc stood and calmly walked toward the door, his steps slow but firm. He opened it halfway, revealing 2 security officers in dark uniforms. Their faces were covered by half-masks, their eyes cold and unreadable. One of them held up a small screen with Hope's image, taken from somewhere. The other scanned the shop with a frown. "We have reports of a non-registered stray working here," the officer said. "She's no stray," Doc replied, his voice calm but unshaking. "She's my apprentice. She's illegal," the officer snapped. "And you're harboring her. That's a crime." Hope stayed hidden behind a shelf, heart pounding. Every part of her wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Doc didn't shout or argue. Instead, he said, "She has a name, and she earns her place here." The officer took a step forward, hand resting on his belt. "She's property of the colony registry, not your shop." Hope's nails dug into the metal shelf. Property, that word had once been tattooed into her mind, but before the officer could take another step, Doc raised his voice slightly. "Do you have a warrant?" The question hung in the air, cold and clear. The officer blinked and looked at his partner, then said, "No, not yet." "Then leave," Doc said. "Come back with proper documents." There was a pause, a long moment of tension. Then the officers turned and walked away. "Next time, she won't be here," the taller one warned. Doc closed the door slowly and locked it. Hope stepped out from behind the shelf, her breathing still fast. Doc turned to her and said only one thing: "They'll be back." She looked down, ashamed. "I'll leave," she whispered, You don't have to lose your shop for me. Doc crouched beside her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. This shop doesn't matter more than you do, he said quietly. She looked into his eyes and finally saw it. He meant every word. Not out of pity, but something deeper, something real. That night, they didn't eat, they planned. Hope helped pack tools, spare parts, and food into old bags. Doc showed her the back exit, one that led through tunnels below the district. I built this years ago, just in case, he said. In case of what? She asked. In case the world tried to take something I care about. He answered. She didn't cry, but her chest ached. No one had ever cared before, not enough to fight, not enough to hide her. In the middle of the night, Doc handed her a worn ID badge. It had a different name, a false registry, but her picture, from now on. This is who you are, officially, he said. Hope held it like it was made of gold. Her name was printed at the bottom, Hope Lynn. It was more than a name, it was a promise. A few hours later, loud boots marched outside again. They didn't knock this time. Hope and Doc slipped through the hidden tunnel, just as the front door burst open. They ran through the underground path, their shadows moving along the walls. Hope didn't look back. She didn't need to be, 'cause this time, she wasn't running alone. She was running with someone who believed in her, and that made her faster than fear. The sky above the outer zone was gray and heavy. Clouds hung low like metal plates ready to fall. Hope walked beside Doc, their boots crunching over broken glass and rusted pipes. The tunnels had led them out of the market district. Now they were on the edge of forgotten land, where nobody came unless they were hiding or hunting. Doc led her to an abandoned repair station once used for mining bots. It was full of dust, rusted shelves, and memories. But the power still worked, barely, and that was enough. They set up fast, working in silence. Hope cleaned tools while Doc repaired a solar cell on the roof. Neither spoke much, but their hands moved with purpose. Even far from the city, the risk was real. If they were found again, there would be no time to argue or explain. But something had shifted in Hope. She no longer felt like a creature hiding in shadows. She had a name now, a job, and a future worth defending. For the first time in her life, she wanted to fight for it, not just survive. That evening, an old trader stumbled into the station. He had a broken drone and a wounded leg. He looked at Hope, paused, and asked, "You're the girl from the city, aren't you? The stray?" Hope stood up straight, her heart racing, but she didn't lower her head. "No," she said. "I'm Hope Lynn, technician." The man blinked in surprise, then slowly smiled. "Good," he said, "because my drone's a mess." She took it from him and got to work. Doc watched from the corner, his arms crossed, saying nothing. Hope opened the drone's casing with smooth hands, cleaned the dust, rewired the loose connections. She wasn't just guessing anymore, she understood what she was doing. After 20 minutes, the drone lifted into the air with a gentle hum. The trader clapped his hands, amazed. "You fixed it faster than anyone I've met," he said. Hope handed it back with a small nod. "You deserve fair payment," she added. The man laughed and gave her more than double the usual fee. He looked at Doc and said, "You've trained her well." Doc replied softly, "She trained herself." Word began to spread. Even out here, other traders, scavengers, and farmers started coming. Not all of them were kind. Some tried to test her, to mock her, but she never flinched. Every time they called her a stray, she showed them her badge. Every time they doubted her, she fixed what no one else could. One day, a mother arrived with a broken hoverchair for her injured son. Hope spent 3 hours fixing it, working until her fingers bled. When the boy finally moved again, he smiled at her with pure joy. That night, Doc sat beside her and said, "You didn't have to help them for free." Hope looked at him and said, "I remember what it felt like to be helpless." Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't the same girl who had licked cold soup from a dirty bowl. She had power now, not power to hurt or destroy, but the power to lift others up. Late one evening, as they closed the shop, someone knocked on the side door. Hope opened it and froze. It was one of the officers from the city, the same one who had called her property. But this time, he wasn't holding a weapon. He looked nervous, almost ashamed. "I'm off duty," he said. "I came for a repair." Doc stepped forward, ready to say no, but Hope stopped him with a single word. "I'll do it." She sat down and took the officer's damaged scanner. Worked quietly, professionally. The officer kept his eyes low the whole time. When she handed it back, "Working perfectly," he whispered. "Thank you, Miss Hope." She didn't smile, but she nodded as he left. Doc looked at her with silent pride. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," she answered. "But now he knows who I am. Not a stray, not a number, not someone to throw away." She was Hope Lynn, and she had earned every piece of her name. The stars were clearer in the outer zones. Hope often sat on the rooftop at night, looking up at them. She didn't know their names or where they led, but she didn't feel small anymore when she stared into the sky. She felt ready. The old repair station had changed, just like her. It wasn't just a shop now. It was a place people came to with hope in their hearts. A place where the word broken didn't mean useless. It meant fixable. One morning, a convoy of traders arrived, bigger than usual. They brought crates of machines, tools, and children, not for sale but rescued, refugees from a mining colony that had collapsed. Sick, scared, and silent, Hope stood still as the youngest of them stepped forward. She saw herself in their eyes, hunger, fear, no trust in the world, but then the smallest one reached out and touched her jumpsuit, pointed at the stitched name, "Hope." The child asked in a trembling voice. Hope knelt down and nodded. She pulled out a food packet from the shelf and handed it over. The child smiled for the first time. That moment spread like fire, quiet, slow, and unstoppable. Soon, the shop was full of noise, laughter, mess, and questions. Hope taught them how to sort wires, how to hold tools, how to feel safe. She gave them the same blanket she was once given. Doc just watched, arms crossed, pride shining in his eyes. But one day, something unexpected happened. A stranger walked into the shop, dressed in fine clothes, with papers in hand. He was from the city, from the Central Authority, a legal officer, tall and cold. He asked for Hope by name, not as a threat but as a request. "We've reviewed your case," he said, "and your story. We'd like to offer you a position." Doc stepped forward quickly. "She's not going anywhere. She doesn't want to." Hope stayed calm, looking the officer straight in the eyes. "What kind of position?" she asked. "Technical advisor," he said, "on juvenile welfare systems. We want to rebuild programs that failed children like you." There was a long silence. Hope looked around at the children now sleeping in hammocks and corners, looked at Doc, who had given her everything when she had nothing. She smiled and replied, "I already have a job." The officer was quiet, then gave a slow nod and said, "Then maybe you can teach us from here." He left the shop without argument, and Hope knew something had shifted. Not just for her but for others like her. Later that night, she and Doc sat by the fire pit behind the shop. Doc sipped his tea while Hope repaired a cracked data tablet. The fire flickered gently, sparks floating up into the dark sky. "You've become something else," Doc said softly. Hope looked at him, confused. "You started as someone who begged," he continued, "but now they come to you, hoping." She didn't speak, just smiled and continued working. Doc added, "You deserve more. You always did." Hope looked at the stars again and whispered, "I just needed someone to believe it first." She stood and looked at the small building behind them, filled with kids, machines, dreams, and memories. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't rich, but it was hers. And the broken girl from the alley had become something no one expected. Not a stray, not a burden, not a pet, but a name people spoke with respect, a light in dark places, a fixer of things, and of hearts, hope,